Hey, how you doing? Welcome to the middle of week 6. We're talking about natural apocalypses this week and thinking about what do we think about when we're thinking about the end of the world. We're also thinking about our final projects for Humanities 101, and you are starting to talk about those and consider what you might or might not do with those projects. I want to mention something about those projects right off the bat, and then we'll jump into a lecture for this week, a PowerPoint, that actually is maybe going to help you think a little bit more about those projects. So one of the things that I said in the assignment sheet was that you cannot do a poem or a song or a dramatic reading or a dance as part of your project. I've changed that a little bit, and I didn't change the language in the assignment because I want to make sure you do it within context. If you want to do something creative, that's fine. Great. And in fact, I highly encourage it. But if you do something creative, then you need to also include an analytical component of the assignment. So you have to analyze a little bit why you did what you did, how you did what you did, what you doing what you did shows about the humanities. So creative is fine, as long as you also have a couple page paper dealing with the analytical component of the assignment. And just to remember, the point of the assignment is to think about the humanities and not the apocalypse. Now, the apocalypse, of course, is something we've been interested in all semester, something we remain interested in. And your paper is going to be tied in with the apocalypse in some way, but the main point is to think about the humanities. So I will just mention again the song Human that we listened to. The song Human was created by a student of mine, and that song was a wonderful song to wrap up the semester with, but it also came along with an analytical component, a couple pages that the student wrote talking about how the song referred to different texts and how those texts helped her understand what the humanities were. That's what I want you to go for. If you're going to do creative, make sure you've got that analytical component as well. Let's jump into the PowerPoint for today, and then we'll talk about humanities and the apocalypse. So here goes. So this PowerPoint is called Creating in a Dangerous World, and we're going to think about what it means to create in a natural world that is often maybe dangerous and trying to kill us. Let's talk about that. You see my picture behind me is of a cave, and this is a cave painting that comes from Cueva de los Manos in Rio Pinturas. My Spanish is horrible. My daughter, who teaches Spanish, will tell you that. But this is a cave painting that was found down in south of Central America, and it was dated to be back about 1000 BC, so we're talking over 1200 years ago, something give or take 100 years. And this was what people in the cave did to represent themselves. So it's a really fantastic piece of art. You know, we don't often think of more primitive humans or humans in prehistory as having art, but this is a really fantastic piece of art. It represents so much about humanity and what it means to exist and to say you existed. Starting with the cave painting and with the cave behind me, because I want to talk a little bit about what it means to exist in the natural world. Imagine emerging from a cave, or even walking out of your house and experiencing the terrifying reality of dogs barking in the background, or of the natural world. Imagine not knowing exactly who you were or what you were in that moment when this terrifying reality was taking place. If you think about a moment that you've had in nature where the power of nature was so astounding that you felt like nothing, say during a horrible rainstorm, or during an unbelievable heat, or during wind, or during snow, when you were surrounded by nature and you were nothing. I think it's a very human experience to look up into the sky and realize there's something so much more powerful there. We can go to Wizard of Oz and see how that experience gets repeated within our arts over and over. I'm not going to look at a lot of natural images, but I wanted to start with natural images to help us think about how, when we're thinking about the humanities, so often we're thinking about cultural production, but this cultural production happens within a world that has a direct effect on our ability to live, let alone our understanding of how we exist in this world. And our readings this week are asking you to think about that natural world and the natural apocalypse. And one of the ways that it's asking you to think about that in particular is, what are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing that we would threaten our world? How is that even a thing that we could contemplate doing, to say that building this plant or running this machine or eating or making this kind of product is more valuable than a land that we might walk on? Our readings are asking you to think about that, to think about what it means to exist in a world that is changing as we stand on it. And it's changing precisely because of what we're doing to that world. So we watched a video, and then you read some poems, and we're gonna look at two of those poems. One of the poems already had an audio of the author reading it, but we're gonna look at the other two. This is Ruin and Beauty by Patricia Young, written in 2000. It's so quiet now. The children have decided to stop being born. We raise our cups in an empty room. In this light, the curtains are transparent as gauze. Through the open window, we hear nothing. No airplane, lawnmower, no siren speeding its white pain through the city's traffic. There is no traffic. What remains is all that remains. The brick school at the 5 Points crosswalk is drenched in morning glory. Its white flowers are trumpets festooning this coastal town. Will the eventual forest rise up and remember our footsteps? Already seedlings erupt through the cement. Crabgrass heaves through the cracked marble. Already wolves come down from the hills to forage among us. We are like them now, just another species looking to the stars and howling extinction. They say the body accepts any kind of sorrow, that our ancestors lay down on their stomachs in the school hallways as children lay down like matches waiting for a nuclear fire. It wasn't supposed to end like this. All ruin and beauty, vines waterfalling down, a century's architecture. It wasn't supposed to end so quietly, without fanfare or fuss. A man and an old woman collecting rain in coffee tins. Darling, the wars have been forgotten. These days our quarrels are only with ourselves. Tonight you sit on the edge of the bed loosening your shoes. The act is soundless, without future weight. Shall we name this failure? Should we wake to the regret at the end of time, doing what people have always done, and say it was not enough? So, a beautiful poem. A poem that imagines being in that future already where the world has decided we no longer belong, and imagines what might remain of humanity and what we might regret. It really is a beautiful poem. The other poem that we read, and I should have written down the name, I did not, was a poem talking with a daughter, a young daughter, and explaining how, thinking about how the young girl had no concept of what we were doing to our world. That poem, along with Ruin and Beauty and our next one, are all talking about how we understand our human experience, particularly with others. This is the end of You and I. And unlike the previous poem, where I didn't write that one, I was just guessing at the way I might read it if I had written it. I can read this one in the way that I wrote it because I wrote it. The end of You and I. Shall we be surprised when our skin burns, when blisters bubble, when the heat sears? What will I say when your hair falls out? Will I still say you are pretty? I am sure I will. That dog, that silly dog with whom we played, has finally become functional, a guard. A meal should we want. When will we decide that even Michigan is waterless? When the lakes bloom in sickening green, when it won't snow unexpectedly, who's to say this is the end of You and I? Even though we have known it was there someday. Why should we admit it? I won't speak to whether or not that's a beautiful poem. I will tell you, as the poet, I wrote this when the algae bloomed in Lake Erie, and thinking about the nearing of environmental collapse. And I wrote it thinking about my wife and how we might turn to each other one day and understand what it meant that our world collapsed under our watch. I started talking about caves. I want to tell you a story about a cave. Imagine you're sitting in a cave, and all you can do is sit there in the cave and watch a wall. And on that wall, there are shadows that are being cast. Shadows, maybe hinting at something that's happening behind you, behind another wall that is blocking your view. You don't know what's back there. You don't know where those shadows may be coming from or what that light is. All you can see are the shadows before you on the cave wall. And maybe one of them looks to be something that is dancing, and maybe another looks to be something that you might, I don't know, some kind of construction, and maybe something looks like a vessel of some sort, but you really don't know because all you can see is the shadows. Maybe you talk amongst each other, maybe you talk to your friends and try to figure out what this stuff is, but you're really not quite sure. You can only put the best names that you have on them. You can only have the best imagination that you and your friends can come up with together. Now, within this cave, there may be people back here, or there may not. Maybe the shadows are just being cast from this light coming from the open mouth of the cave. You don't know any of this because, of course, you've never turned around. You've never seen what's happening. But imagine if one of you or your friends were to stand up and find a way out, to start walking up the way. Now, maybe your friend gets this far and sees these weirdos standing behind you with these things and gets scared and runs back. And maybe the next friend stands up and goes a little further and sees, wait a minute, there's not just this fire or not just these weirdos, there's something beyond, something even brighter, something even more magical. And he gets this far and he gets scared and he runs back. But this friend in the middle who stands up and then starts to walk out actually walks all the way to the end of the cave. And what does she see there? She sees a magical world. A world that nobody could actually figure out just by looking at the wall of a cave, but that one has to walk out and experience. And maybe she comes back and she tells you about it. Maybe she tells you to ignore these silly little pictures on the wall, but to stand up and walk with her. Or maybe, having walked out of this cave, she knows something that these people don't, and she comes back and tells these people to leave, go sit down, you don't belong here. And she takes over and she starts to show new pictures on the wall. Imagine escaping the cave and seeing something wondrous. This photo is by Professor Ryan Flathow, who's a professor at Kellogg Community College in Battle Creek, Michigan. He's also a friend of mine, a childhood friend of mine, high school friend of mine. And he's a art professor, photography professor. And it's just a remarkable shot. Imagine seeing something new walking out of the cave. You may have heard this story before. This story comes from Plato in the Republic, and it's called The Allegory of the Cave. And here's what the story means. Plato, ancient Greek philosopher, intellectual father of Aristotle, Plato came up with this idea that what's happening in the world is that most people live lives without ever actually asking a question. Most people just accept what they see on the wall. Most people just accept what they see in their experience without ever asking, is this the way it should be? Is this what meaning really is? Instead, they sit in the cave and they watch the shadows on the wall. And most people can't know reality because it happens behind them, and they never bother to turn around and look. Most experience all reality as just the shadow. Plato said that only the philosopher could walk out of the cave. Only the philosopher can experience reality. Only the philosopher knows what it looks like out there. And the philosopher experiences that, learns it, and comes back and tells all the rest of us who are just sitting here trying to learn what's on the wall. The philosopher comes back and says, no, wait, there's something more. There's an experience you haven't had. The philosopher interprets and reveals reality. And perhaps there are some bad philosophers, some philosophers who decide to stand behind us and cast false shadows up on the wall. They've had a different experience, and they've somehow gotten in power, and now they're casting false shadows. I won't bother talking about the images other than to mention that Martin Luther King in his speech, in one of his sermons, talks about this idea of a shadow that is cast by that which we do not see. Say perhaps the shadow of whiteness, or the shadow of power, or the shadow of a domineering class, or maybe the shadow of racism. Everything that we see is a shadow by that which we do not see. Plato was talking about the philosopher. He was a philosopher. He liked philosophers. But think about it. What if it's not the philosopher that escapes the cave? What if it's the community college student who takes courses and becomes an expert, becomes a professional, and decides to come back into her community and tell the world what she's experienced? Or what if it's the artist? What if the artist is the one who escapes the cave? I still haven't figured out how to do audio here, so I'm going to play this for just a moment, and then it will be included in the PowerPoint that will be on the website.
No friends or no family to catch my fall. Running on empty, was nothing left in me but doubt. Picked up a pen, wrote my way out.
Go ahead, stop that. So that's Wrote My Way Out by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and done with Nas and I'm sorry, I should have written down the names, a couple of other artists. And it's a really great song that talks about what it means to write your way out of your circumstances to find a new reality with your words. What if it's not the philosopher that finds their way out? What if it's not a corrupt leader who finds their way out? What if it's the humanities that finds the way out? Or the humanities scholar? What if it's you who finds a way to provide shadows on the wall? To go out and share your experiences, to show people what it is that you've experienced, not just in this class, but with your abilities that you gained in this class, your abilities to look at art, to listen to music, to read, to think. What if you take those abilities now and go back into your communities and show them shadows on the wall, or perhaps even lead them out into new realities? This is A to Z by Kumi Yamashita from New York in 2014. Yamashita creates shadow images. It's really beautiful work. It's worth looking her up. My hope with humanities is that we think about this scary world we live in. We think about the natural fear that we might have, and we think about the apocalyptic fear that we might have, and the fears of a disease, or the fears of a race war, or the fears of each other, and we recognize that there's a way out, that there's some reality that we can see, and that maybe it's on us as people who are thinking, and people who are writing, and people who are creating, people who appreciate human culture. Maybe it's on us to show the way out, to show shadows on the wall, but also to help lead people out. That's the lecture for this week. I look forward to seeing your projects. We look forward to seeing you next week and wrapping the course up. Take care.